Well, hello everyone, and again, welcome to How to Become a BIM Manager Superstar with Ideate Software and Laura K. Smith. My name is Richard Taylor from Ideate Software, and I'm joining you today from Boston, where it's a little bit warmer than Chicago and the upper Midwest, so hopefully wherever you are, you're warm. In this first in a series of customer webinars, I am absolutely thrilled to have our guest speaker today be Laura K. Smith from SNC Lavalin. And before we switch over the baton to Laura, I've just got a few housekeeping items that I kind of mentioned before, is that everyone is in a listen-only mode. However, at any particular time, you can type questions into the question window. I'll be reviewing them. I'll try to answer them. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a period where Laura can answer those questions as well. Also, people always ask if this webinar is being recorded, and it is being recorded, and it will be available on our Ideate Software website at a later date. So, with those particular housekeeping items out of the way, it is my great honor and great pleasure to introduce Laura K. Smith from SNC Lavalin. So, Laura, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Ideate, for giving me the opportunity to share. My belief has always been to share what I've learned, what I've struggled with, and help others in the industry move forward. Hopefully some of the ideas I share today can help you move forward and to bring BIM prevalent in your firm, and also use some pretty great tools that I've found useful for a long time. So, a little about me. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. I moved up to Vancouver, BC in 2011 to be a BIM manager for architecture. And last April, SNC Lavalin came to me and asked me to be the BIM manager for their complex buildings department. SNC Lavalin is one of the largest engineering firms around the world. They have offices all over the place and over 50,000 employees. SNC does works in 6 key markets, which is clean power, infrastructure, mining and metallurgy, nuclear, and oil and gas. I'm also a BIM blogger. I've been a blogger since 2012. BIM Freak is my tag and my website. And in that blog, this is where I try to share what I've done, share my ideas, and help people move forward. And I'm always happy to answer any questions and help anybody I can. So when Ideate came and asked if I would present on the tools that I use for them, I was pretty excited to share. And I also thought I should start from where the tools fit into my workflow and how I came about using them and how I decided to use them. And of course, that was in the creation of my BIM manuals. I've made 2 BIM manuals so far for 2 architectural firms, and now I'm working on my 3rd here in infrastructure complex buildings. So this is kind of a workflow that I've come up with, and I'm hopeful that it'll give you guys ideas. I'm going to talk about the tools that I've used, which is BIMlink, Sticky, and Explore. And then I'm going to give you some thoughts on and give you some examples of how I've used them. So let me get started here on creating a BIM manual. So I think the key to a BIM manual is to know and understand that it's always a work in progress. Excuse me. All my BIM manuals have revisions at the bottom. I think my last firm, I was there for 2 years. I was up to revision 6. The firm before that, I think I was there for 5 years, and I started the BIM manual 3 years in. So for 2 years, I was actually at revision 12. So these manuals are always adjusted per staff needs, project needs, contractual needs that you've discovered, things you learn as you move forward in your firm on your path to BIM. And I think the other key is never be afraid to be wrong. No one's perfect. No one knows all the answers. I'm wrong a lot. I don't take offense to that. I don't get upset when someone points it out. I take it as a learning stage and I adjust. So I think it's really important when you're creating this manual that you know that this isn't law and it's not always going to be right. So how do you create a BIM manual? Well, first you kind of have to understand the needs of your firm. I think the key to the manual is understanding the uses of BIM you're going to use or you're going to move forward in order to help your firm become successful. And in order to understand the uses, you have to understand the regular contract they use. And I will tell you, most places, most firms, most owners, no one understands the contractual language of BIM. It's just not there yet. And I'm not sure there's anybody that really knows it, but it's moving forward. So you still have to know what your company is putting in the contract. For example, if a design firm, in their contract, they want all their consultants to use 3D models, you have to have that as part of your BIM manual. This is what the contract requires. In your contract, if you're required to do asset management at the end of your project, those are the things that have to go in the BIM manual. So that's kind of an example of what your contract requirements would be. You also have to understand the design flexibility of your firm. What do they, like I said, I've been in architecture for 22 years, and so I am learning what engineering needs to do in their firm. What they did in architecture is completely different than what they did in engineering, what they do in engineering. So that flexibility on how architects run through each project and what they need to move around to be and design, and how engineers work on a project and what they need to design and move around in their spaces. You have to understand that. You also have to understand the importance of model accuracy, which of course ties to your contract requirements. If you're just modeling for 2D documentation, how accurate does your model have to be? That's your BIM manual has to allude to that with your level of development requirements. And then you also have to understand the deliverables of your project, standard deliverables of your project. Are we giving them the model? Are we giving them as-built drawings? Are we giving them asset management? Those things, again, tie to the contract, and then will tie to how your manual is set up to lead your team to produce your BIM deliverables. So the second part of creating a BIM manual, of course, is understanding your staff. If your staff don't even know how to use Revit, create those 3D models, that's where you have to start. You have to create a BIM manual for those people that are coming from a 2D space to a 3D space. So you can't just start a manual jumping to how to create families and connections that work within the 3D environment if most of your staff are starting from zero. And again, this would be your revision, where the first manual would be starting from zero. This is the component, this is the content, this is how we use it. Revision 2 would be everybody knows how to use it, so we're going to skip that piece and we're going to move on to this is the information loaded into the model and this is the next step. So that's kind of how those revisions work. And then you also have to know if you actually have a division in your company of what used to be called drafters and designers are now 3D modelers and documenters. So are you actually going to have a staff that just documents sheets and then staff that design in 3D? So you have to understand those needs, understand where your staff is, and that's the next key to creating an accurate BIM manual. The third thing is we need to provide easily understood standards and workflows. And in my experience, most companies use workflows from 40 years ago that worked in hand drafting, and they try to move and stretch them and adjust them to work in a technology, digital workflow. Those are not easily understood workflows, standards, and processes. So what you need to do is take those workflows and processes, make them easy for everybody to use in a digital environment. It has to be related to projects, has to be appropriate for what we do. Architects have different workflows than mechanical engineers. Structural engineers have different workflows than electrical engineers. So you have to make sure the process fits with what your team and your projects do. So after you've created your BIM manual, you have the ideas, you have the processes, you have an understanding of what your office needs, what your staff needs are, you can now sit down and start creating elements of a manual that's required to produce the level of BIM that you're trying to achieve. What I've done, these are some of the things that I've done, is I actually have a Revit model keeper checklist, which is for model accuracy and compliance of standards, so it would adjust for each project requirement. And then I have my workflow for how the projects would go through into the path of the level of BIM required on the project. So the example that I have on the right for my workflow is how the user roles in BIM 360 on our projects work. And when everybody understands it, it's simple, it's easy, and when everybody reads it, they know what their role is and they know what they're going to do. Checklist, same thing. It's simple, it's basic, it's easy, but these are high-level important elements that have to be checked in your Revit model regularly. So now, Richard, I'm going to hand off to you to talk a little bit about Ideate.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, when Laura and I were going through this presentation, and she's going to be showing some examples of how she uses Ideate software with her BIM Manager processes, I thought, well, it'd be good to kind of just give everyone a brief overview, a high-level overview of our four solutions from Ideate software. So starting at the left there with Ideate BIM Link, Laura's going to talk a little bit about that. So with Ideate BIM Link, Revit users can extract large amounts of information from the Revit model and send that to Microsoft Excel. They can make changes, updates, or review, and then pull volumes of precise BIM data back into the Revit model with speed, ease, and accuracy. So it's all about that data connection with Excel. The second solution is called Ideate Sticky, which allows you to link Excel data into the Revit projects as schedules, which enhances cross-team workflows. And so, again, Laura's going to talk a little bit about how you would link in an Excel spreadsheet for sort of visualization purposes. And then third is our Ideate Explorer, which is a model browser that allows you to audit and review your model, which is unlike the default project browser in Revit because you can see every instance of every element in the Revit model. You can explore, navigate, query, and in addition, you can review warnings with our Ideate Warnings Manager, which is now included as part of Ideate Explorer. And then finally, we have a collection of tools called Ideate Apps. So it's a collection of 9 productivity applications for all Revit users that will decrease the time spent on common Revit tasks and increase the accuracy of the BIM data within your Revit model. So that's a very quick high-level overview. If you'd like to learn more, of course, you can go to ideatesoftware.com, and we've got lots of information there. But now I'd like to switch it back, the baton back to Laura for the main part of her presentation. So thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Richard. So I'll talk a little bit about how I use the Ideate tools currently at SNC Lavalin in my templates that I'm creating, because my department is starting from 0 within Revit and the use of it, and I'm training them currently on how to move forward. So right now on my start page, I utilize Sticky to stick my Revit checklist, my model management checklist, on the start page, so that when staff members, as I teach them Revit, and I'm teaching them how to properly model and use the software, I'm also explaining to them the errors that can occur. And those errors that occur, I can put on this checklist and show them that it's all been checked and they're good. And then if there's issues, at the bottom of the checklist, I can put comments like, you have duplicate elements in the same location, please verify before placing. Or too many work sets, please adjust your work sets. Any of the information is displayed right at the start of the project. The user sees it, and the user can address it. So that's one of the important things I use Sticky for on my start page. I then use BIM Link, because I will get sheet lists. In the first project I've done here, the client required a sheet list from them before we even started the project, so basically a cartoon set. And it had to be, those numbers had to be approved. Sheet numbers had to be approved before we could start developing sheets. So what I did is I took that sheet list approved by the client from BIM Link. I pulled out the blank schedule, sheet schedule, put in that information, pushed it back in, and now I have placeholder sheets so my users aren't creating sheets that don't follow the standard. They are now set with everything they need to move forward. And next, I use BIMLink and Sticky for project required data. So this last slide, we have electrical engineers that have to provide these Excel sheets with this information on it. I can pull information from BIMLink from the model for them, and then they fill out the Excel sheet with what they need with their checks, and I stick it back in on the sheets that are required. So this is how I've set up my template in my projects right now for this client. So this is that example of that conduit schedule, feeder schedule that my electrical engineers are required to submit on their documents. Currently, the workflow that is being used is that the electrical designer who signs off on this Excel sheet opens the Revit model and walks through each one of their conduit locations and the information they need. They fill it out by hand. There's no link. There's no information being pulled from Revit. And they type it all up, and then when they make a PDF and they print it and insert the PDF in the PDF set for the deliverable. So what I've done is I've taken their schedule, from BIMLink, I've added the content from Revit, pulled the content from Revit that I can, which is room name, the conduit tags that they have, some comments, and some notes, and the drawing references. So the stuff that I could physically pull from Revit that would work on this project, I pulled from BIMLink. I put it into Excel, and then I have, which I'll go over in a little bit, I actually have like a Excel program that was developed that then pushes that individual data onto this sheet in the locations that are required, and then the designer can fill out the rest. And when it's all filled out, I bring it back into Revit, and this schedule is then populated on the sheet. So hopefully that makes sense. So basically, it's a way to help the designer not make less errors on room name changes, room number changes, notes, anything that's happening in the model is now updated on the sheet with a simple push-pull operation. So there's no data loss and errors are omitted from this section of the project. Now, Sticky was also used in this. So when I push and pull and I create this Excel sheet for them, they've filled it all out. The information is now in Revit for what they need. Then I can stick in what they have so the schedule looks exactly the same on the sheet as it will in the required documentation books that they submit at the end of a project. Again, this allows for less errors. It creates more of a link, puts the I in BIM in your model, and then hopefully eventually, in the future, I know it'll happen, this will no longer be, all the data in the Revit model will now populate this sheet rather than the manual population of a human. So we can again put more information in the model and prevent more errors. But currently this is what we do to do the best we can. I also have Explorer set up. I actually love this tool for the simple, basic reason that you know your users have inserted AutoCAD files, have exploded them, and then deleted elements, and now you have this huge pile of data in your Revit database that's just wasting space and causing corruption. With Explorer, you can easily go in, find all those elements that you can't find any, there's no way you can select them in your model and get rid of them. Just clean it up. It's an easy way to find all the families. Like, you know how much we all love the naming of our families, family 1, family 2, or lighting fixture .004.rfa. So this tool allows me to go in and look and vet that information for my users. And it also allows me to see where their gaps in knowledge is. Because if they're putting this information in the project, there's obviously knowledge gaps. Explorer also came out I don't know how recent it is, but this warnings thing has been fantastic. It's a lot easier to go through warnings on this than it is through the Revit interface, mostly because it just kind of gives you the red, green, and white, medium, low, high warnings. So you can ignore those warnings that aren't as important, like sketches off access. So those, 11 warnings I can ignore because I know that those aren't important in this project. But the important ones like riser heights and treads, those kind of things I can address with the designer and ask them if this is accurate. So I love the warnings thing. I've just started using it. I think it's amazing. It's my plug on Explorer. So I wanted to show you some of the examples of how I've been using BIMlink in actual projects besides my template. This is how I met Ideate in 2012. I was tasked in my firm to help the functional programmer in a hospital project feed the functional requirements into Revit with all the data and have it in the model. And before 2012, this was all done manually for 1,500 rooms. And in 2012, I was tasked to figure out a way to make it in the model because we were required. So at that time, I believe BIMlink was just coming out. And so what I did is I got the functional requirements with the areas requirements, the room, the name, the description, the number, pushed it into Revit, and then the users would place rooms where they were going to put them, and Revit would color the rooms to say red is too big, purple is too small, and green is just right. So they had a percentage. The functional programmer had a percentage that we could be in to do that. So that was how I used BIMlink for that. And then I took it a step further, and I actually pulled the information from the Revit model to create my room data sheets. And that was how I discovered an Excel program, or I had a programmer write me an Excel macro program mega file that I would pull all the data from Revit, and I would feed every one of these lines in my room data sheet. And then we would, at the time there was no sticky, so we would image these and put them on the project. As soon as sticky came out, this is in Excel. So I could just paste or stick them all on the sheets that they were required. And then whenever I pulled out the data and updated them in Excel, it's almost a live link. It would just reload into my project. So this whole process right here created less errors on the project. The functional programmer loved it, saved him several hundreds of hours of doing this all manually. And these are the kind of things that you can use these tools to think outside the box with and to create better product and BIM products with your company. So basically, I know I kind of whizzed through this. I apologize. We have time to answer any question you want, so I'm just kind of tie this up a little bit. I am a firm believer that there is no straight path to do anything. You have to look at a problem that someone brings you, and you need to figure out what tools are out there to help you fix that problem. And that functional programming thing was my first jump off the cliff. Oh my God, I have a week to give them an answer if I can do this of what's required. Otherwise, who knows? We're not going to be able to deliver the project as required. So that kind of stuff, when you're put under pressure and you have to come up with a solution that's never been thought of before and never been tried before, reaching out to software companies like Ideate, like Glynis helped me. She was there with me. They walked me through it. This was a new program for them. We went through it, and it was beautiful. It saved the project tons of time, and now it's used on every project in that firm. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that don't follow cookie cutter examples of project setup, cookie cutter examples of BIM manuals. There isn't one out there. There isn't one out there that's going to work for your company exactly. Use it as a guide. Use it to give you more ideas. So I think it's kind of incredible that I've gotten this opportunity and I've found this company that stands behind me and helps me. And that's my soapbox for Ideate, my soapbox speech for Ideate. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Guess I should have added more stuff on there.
Well, Laura, thank you. This is excellent. And you know what? Along those lines, since you were talking about the room data sheets, there's a question about, Ideate BIM Link with linked models. And, I think this is pretty typical in the sense that, whether you've got an architectural model or an MEP model, typically there are, 5 or 10 or even more models that are all linked together. So the question was, does Ideate BIM Link allow you to use that data from the linked model? And I'll answer that. I'll say yes, it does. You can extract, for instance, room information or even, let's say work sets across multiple models that are all linked together. And that can be reviewed in the Excel format. However, if you're changing information from Excel, or let's say you've updated all the work sets, and now you're importing those changes back into the model, the way that Revit works, as probably everyone knows, is that you can only change or modify elements that are within your parent file. So the file that we're actually sort of sitting in when we extract the information in BIM Link is the file that we would be importing and making changes. So with that kind of explanation, Laura, I was wondering, like, your room data example, were the rooms themselves, like, were the rooms in a file that were, let's say, there were multiple links and the room containers were in one file, or basically how did that all kind of pan out, or how was it set up, or were the rooms in individual files?
Yeah, so this was actually working with the architectural firm, so they owned the rooms, but this electrical conduit cable feeder schedule, that the architect's model is linked into our electrical model that I get this information from. So this is what you're talking about, is I use it with the link. The architect's link feeds most of the schedule, not my electrical, not the actual model I'm in, which is the electrical model.
And then from that conduit and electrical schedule, though, if they are, is it mostly for review, or are they actually making some updates and changes, which would be in their electrical model, correct?
Correct. So all the information that they change in the schedule is in my electrical model. And then the cool thing about this is when the architects update their rooms, which happens all the time, they got to move them around, change the sizes, change the numbering or whatever. When I pull this out, it's automatically updated into this format on Excel. So the architect can do all their adjustments in the room, and the designer who's filling this out doesn't have to check that room 112 has been changed to 125, because I'm pulling that linked model information through BIM Link into my conduit and cable feeder schedule.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, I'm sure people are using the room location point, and I know we've done quite a few enhancements with Ideate BIM Link where, for instance, if you're in let's say a mechanical HVAC model, and you would like to look at the room information from the architect's model, you don't necessarily even have to have the space and the room connected, meaning that Ideate BIM Link will extract the room information from the architect's model sort of geometrically. It knows where that room is, as long as the room location point is in the right spot, if that makes sense. So sometimes I've noticed, or I played around it with let's say the air diffuser, maybe is not geometrically in the same location where the room is, the volumetric of the room, and then we'll get information from BIM Link that's not filled out. And then all you need to do is go and make sure that that room location point is actually in the volume space of the architect's room, and then you can pull all the information about the room that you'd like.
Correct. Yeah. It's a good way. It's also a good way to check that the architect is following your project, your BIM project plan, which is your rooms have to be the whole height, has to be the full height of your ceiling, has to go from floor to ceiling, so that you can pull this information in mechanical and electrical models.
Another thing that, if you go back to your room data sheet slide, right there, that's perfect. So maybe a question is, why were you using Ideate Sticky? And I'm kind of leading the question here, in the sense that you're manipulating that data. As you said, there was an Excel programmer that basically kind of formatted the Excel data in the way that you wanted it, and then you needed to be able to display that within Revit. So,
right. So the requirements, this is a P3 hospital in Canada, which is, I believe, public, private, can never remember the final P, but the required deliverables on these projects are you have to take a call out of each one of these. For example, an OR, you have to do a blow up of the OR with all the equipment tagged in set. You have to do elevations of all the walls, and you have to provide a room data sheet on there, so that your document, your one document sheet that you're providing, has call out, elevations, and the room data sheet, which each P3, which each project gives you a sample of what they want filled out on that one sheet. So that's why I had to use BIM Link and Sticky to provide that information. And at the end of the project, we were required to deliver a model that could be used for asset management. So that information had to be in the model. And that was how that whole process started with, this is our end goal, and these are the steps we have to go to get there. Does that answer the question?
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of leading it a little bit, and you basically answered it perfectly. And with a Revit schedule, basically, you can't create that information sort of natively within Revit. It just doesn't have the tools to assemble the data that you need. And so that's where you were able to sort of use Excel to assemble that data and then display it within Revit using Ideate Sticky.
Correct, because the requirements from the project is that you have to use their room data sheets. And this is what they look like. And how it was done before this was in Word. This is a template in Word that they would use, and they would have 1,500 rooms, and each room had to have this sheet filled out completely.
Excellent. There's another question from Glenn, and feel free if you haven't used COBie data, that's fine, Laura. But the question basically is for you, Laura. It says, have you used BIM Link and for any kind of COBie data? So they were asking if they had a subcontractor who did not use the COBie toolkit, but just kind of curious if you had any exposure or if you've done anything in relation to COBie data.
I've not used any COBie. I've not had any projects that require it here, but I've had friends in the UK that talk about COBie data and BIM Link, but that's all I have. I have no idea how it works. They just say that they've used it. So
okay, yeah, that's great.
If you want to email me, I can totally put you in touch with the COBie queen over there.
Well, and also, from Ideate Software's point of view, we actually ship Ideate BIM Link with some sample COBie links, some link definitions. So the link definition is what we describe as the information that you're extracting out to Excel. So we ship with about 300 link definitions, and there's a whole series of these link definitions that are all set up for COBie data that you can modify. So just to let you know that if you are interested in looking at that, there are already some pieces of COBie information that are delivered with Ideate BIM Link. So,
and I'll also put a note on that as well, that if you go in and you use that and you have any issues, Ideate will be more than happy, from my experience, to jump forward and help you do whatever you can to be successful.
yep, absolutely. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Another question came up, and maybe you have, again, maybe not a lot of experience, or I'm not quite sure how you're using it. In this case, it says, can you elaborate on how Ideate software can help with asset management? So are you using, you talked about this particular one where you're doing the hospital, where you were doing rooms. Were you also like handling the operating equipment and all the medical equipment that needs to go within that room?
Yeah, so how the asset, I'm actually on my project that I started with here at SNC. We're providing asset management model, and the client had all the existing assets in an Excel format with electrical data, manufacturer data, data was installed, and equipment required, and all the stuff that I don't understand with this stuff. But I had all that information, and in using BIM Link, I could extract all the families that we had in place for those, and then put all that data in it and put it back into Revit. So when the client receives the Revit model, they can put it in their asset software to get that information tied together. So BIM Link is a really good tool for me to add information into Revit for asset management. And in this room data sheet, there's like stuff for what gases are in there, and what bed is required, what lamp is required. There's all kinds of information in those data sheets for what's in the model and for what's required in each room. So for both, it's kind of a high level, because it's really whatever the contractor installs has to be updated. And again, if the contractor is using Revit, which I think there are 2 here in Vancouver that have started doing this, and they're actually putting in the information in an Excel file of what they're installing, they push it into the Revit model so it exists in the 3D environment. So it's happening. It's happening that the actual as-built information is getting put into the Revit model through Excel using BIM Link on those projects that are set up to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think from my point of view, from Ideate Software, over the last, let's say, 5 years, we had more of a architecture, engineering, and construction focus, which is, AEC. Now we're seeing really more of an AECO, where the O is the owner. And the owner might be the large hospital, like in this case that Laura's working with, or it could be, we've done a lot of, nuclear power plants where it's the facility operator and owner that's now taking possession of these BIM 3D models and wants those always to be updated and live with all the current assets. And I think, again, in the medical field, large hospitals and medical facilities, that's becoming, standard. Wouldn't you say, Laura? Yeah.
The I in BIM is becoming more prevalent, and ways to make it easy for owners to get to is becoming more useful.
Excellent. Well, please feel free to type any other questions. The other questions that I see here are sort of, I'll answer them privately because they're more about just sort of updates on some of the software. But I don't see any specific additional questions that we haven't already answered. Just let me make sure that we talked about the linked files, and then there was the Kobe question. So, all right. Well, I know we had said that this was about 45 minutes, so we're just about at the 45-minute mark on the webinar. So I certainly want to sincerely thank you, Laura, for an excellent presentation today. We really appreciate all. Yeah, we appreciate it.
So I just want to quickly, I see a question from Erica about where do we hire the programmer for the Excel thing that I found?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
It was in 2012, but you're welcome to email me, and I will pass you his information. I believe he's located in the Midwest. in the States somewhere. But yeah, just go ahead and email me. I'm sorry, Richard. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Well, and in fact, if
so I'll give you this information, there you go. Yeah. That's where you can find me.
Okay. Also, if you are an Ideate a BIM Link customer, we do have several Excel files that are available where we also did the same thing, where we hired an Excel programmer to do some macros. So we have a document issue and revisions workflow where we've done some kind of nice tricks, I guess not really tricks, but nice enhancements to the Excel file. There's also an occupancy data set, and then there's a plumbing fixture calculations. So we do have some of these macros where we've done the same thing, where we've taken the information, extracted it from BIM Link, we've hired a programmer to do some fun things within Excel, and then you're able to then take that information and bring it back into the Revit model using Ideate Sticky. So all those documents or workflows are available on our website. Oh, Laura, you've got a fan. You've got a fan group.
Oh, nice.
Okay, well, again, like I said, I just want to thank you so much for your time and the effort that you put into the presentation today, Laura. We really appreciate it. We know that, you know, I do a lot of these webinars, and I know how much time and effort goes into them, so I just really appreciate your valuable input. And I hope that everyone on the webinar here found some valuable data and some information that they can take away to their own BIM management processes. So just a couple, again, kind of quick housekeeping items is when you exit the webinar, there'll be a very short survey. It's only 4 questions, and these surveys help us determine the kind of content that we deliver to you going forward. So it's really helpful for us to know, you know, what kind of things you're looking for when it comes to these webinars. And then, of course, if you're interested in learning about any of our Ideate software solutions, you know, please visit us online at ideatesoftware.com. We have online help files, we have videos, we have webinar recordings like the one that is done today. And then also, as I said, if you're a customer, you can request those macro data sets that I talked about. So again, my name is Richard Taylor from Ideate Software. I want to thank everyone for attending. And again, huge thanks go to Laura K. Smith of SNC Lavalin. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Bye, Richard.
Thanks again, Laura. And thanks, everyone.